We are tracking multiple waves of cold air on approach, along with a potential winter storm system, and we will break down all the details for you. We will also provide an updated outlook for December, as there has been significant discussion surrounding the forecast for that month, particularly its potential to favor conditions for multiple winter storms and significant cold air intrusion. We'll review the latest data we have on that pattern. A very good Thursday morning to you. I hope you're having an excellent day. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and liking the video if you find it helpful. Also, if there's anything I can keep in my thoughts and prayers for you, please feel free to share it in the comments below, as it's a deeply valued part of our community here. Now, let's dive into this morning's forecast. All right, let's examine that potential winter storm. We'll get straight to the models, beginning with the outlook for next Tuesday, November the 25th. I do anticipate a significant rain event unfolding across a large portion of the central to eastern United States. Initially, there won't be much cold air associated with this system. However, that is expected to change as we progress later into next week. As this transition occurs, moving into Wednesday, Thanksgiving Eve, the forecast points toward a rainy day across the Northeast. We are also hoping to see some much-needed precipitation across the Southeast. I realize that may not be welcome news for everyone's holiday plans, but conditions are becoming increasingly dry across parts of the South. For perspective, my own location here in central South Carolina has not recorded measurable rain for the entire month of November. So, that rainfall is certainly needed. Now, let's shift our focus to Thanksgiving Day itself. What can we expect? Perhaps some scattered rain across the Deep South, but nothing overly significant. However, there is some atmospheric energy to monitor, particularly on the European model, which is currently the most aggressive with this scenario. And please note, this could certainly change on the next model run later this afternoon, but currently it shows a major rainstorm developing for the 28th of November, the day after Thanksgiving. A low-pressure system rapidly intensifies, with additional energy to the north, and these elements combine to generate a winter storm. This is not a definitive forecast, just a single model run, although the ensemble members do offer some support for this solution. I believe the models are still working to resolve the details for this time frame, as we are looking at a system that is roughly 8 to 9 days out. So there remains considerable uncertainty, but it does depict a rather deep low-pressure system off the coast of the Northeast. Cold air would wrap into the moisture field of this low, producing snow on the backside of the system from the spine of the Southern Appalachians all the way up into Pennsylvania and across the broader Northeast. However, I would caution against focusing on the state-by-state details at this stage. We are still in the early stages of tracking this potential, but the model does develop it into what is essentially a full-blown nor'easter, and it evolves into near blizzard conditions for parts of the Northeast as we head into the 29th and 30th. And as I've said, please do not treat this as a certainty. We are not forecasting a blizzard for the 29th of November in the Northeast at this point. It is just one model run, but the atmospheric energy for such a storm is present. Okay, so after that system potentially moves away, what are the other models showing? Let's examine the latest GFS run. It shows a similar scenario, with a significant rainstorm to start our work week next week. As we approach Thanksgiving Eve, there is an indication of some cold air filtering into the northern sections of New England, though it doesn't appear to be a major factor at this point. However, as we move into the heart of Thanksgiving Eve, a significant rainstorm is possible across the Northeast. It appears on this model that much of this energy ejects out ahead of the cold air of the northern stream energy on the GFS. Consequently, there's no significant combining factor between moisture and cold air in this particular model run. However, as we begin to advance into the Thanksgiving morning timeframe, we do see a scenario where cold air is chasing moisture, and throughout Thanksgiving evening and overnight, from the 26th into the 27th, a substantial amount of moisture is forecast across the eastern U.S., which could impact travel. We know the day before Thanksgiving and the day after are peak travel days, and this system could certainly cause disruptions. But this is a starkly different outlook than the European model. So, regarding the time frame where the Euro indicates a major winter storm, when we look at that same period, there's simply nothing showing up on the GFS. For example, this is the outlook for Saturday evening, the 29th, on the GFS, and this is the same time on the European model. The difference is dramatic, isn't it? A massive discrepancy. The European model shows a major winter storm, while the GFS indicates absolutely nothing aside from some ongoing lake effect snow. So, there is a significant disagreement right there. Now, if we consult the Euro AI model, we see a similar story. It depicts a large rainstorm moving across. It doesn't show any significant cold air, and this model only illustrates moisture and precipitation without differentiating between rain or snow. However, based on the thermal profiles, I can tell you this is overwhelmingly rain. A small pocket of snow is a possibility, with a bit of colder air filtering in behind this cold front. Therefore, we could certainly see some lake effect snow develop. We will provide more detail on that as we get closer to the event. But looking at the chart, this grayed out green area could indeed be lake effect snow. But as for the time frame the European model is highlighting for a winter storm, there is absolutely no indication of it here. So, the European model is currently an outlier, but we recognize it's a very capable model. This leads us to ask, is the European Ensemble suite supporting its operational run? We'll examine this in 48-hour periods. If you've been following the channel for any length of time, you'll know I prefer this view. It really helps to isolate the legitimate snowfall signals instead of just viewing a full 240-hour forecast period at once. This method filters out the fleeting signals, like a tenth of an inch or an inch of snow that appears and then vanishes in longer-range projections. And my apologies if you hear me clear my throat. I am contending with some seasonal allergies at the moment. I can already feel them acting up. But as we move into the Thanksgiving holiday and the day that follows, you can see the signal for lake effect snow. It's nothing extreme, but there is a growing signal for some light snow developing across the Midwest. Now, does this signal appear in the same time frame that the operational European model is forecasting? Indeed, it does. You can observe how a light snow signal begins to blossom over the Southern Appalachian Mountains, including parts of North Carolina and Tennessee. The amounts are not substantial, perhaps up to 1 inch in the highlands of West Virginia, and then as we head into the final day or two of November, the mean snowfall projection shows a couple of inches across the Northeast. There is a modest signal that lends some support to the operational run, but we must stress that we are still quite far out in the forecast period. We are looking at around the day 10 time frame, so while there is something to monitor, it's prudent to withhold high confidence until the signal shows consistency and other model guidance begins to come into agreement. So, what's causing this discrepancy? Why is the European model forecasting what it is? Well, it comes down to, you can think of this yellow and orange area as pure energy in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So, we have energy associated with a trough digging southward, and there is also a separate piece of southern stream energy present down here. A combining factor is at play, and you can see it in this significant looping feature right here. It's a process we call phasing, where these streams of energy merge. The northern and southern stream energy are connecting at this point, which is causing a rapid deepening of a low-pressure system. And that is precisely why the operational European model run is depicting such a dynamic scenario with a major winter storm. There has been some model inconsistency back and forth for this time frame, which is why I wanted to break it down for you. Now, what about the Euro AI model, which shows virtually nothing during this period? Why the stark difference? When we examine the energy in the upper levels of the atmosphere on that model, we see it's almost entirely dominated by the northern stream. As a result, you're not getting that crucial interaction. There's very little energy available to the south, though a small piece does manage to escape, moving out from the southern regions ahead of the main trough. But by that point, the cold air hasn't fully established itself. Therefore, the ingredients for a significant winter weather event just don't come together. So, I believe regardless of the outcome, this system is going to deliver a shot of cold air driven by this dip in the trough. I'm confident we're looking at colder than average temperatures. We have been trying to pinpoint and pardon the sniffles. It is that time of year. But we have been forecasting that first significant cold front for late next week, arriving during the last week of November for quite some time. I really feel we're locking in on that timing now. A forecast supported by the 8 to 14-day temperature outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, which I will bring up for you in just a moment. You can see these areas in blue and green, which indicate temperatures anywhere from a few degrees below average to as much as 15 degrees below the seasonal norm. So, for instance, if your average high in the south is around 60 degrees, you could experience a day or two with highs struggling to get out of the 40s or low 50s. So, some chilly days are certainly on the way. Nothing extreme for late November standards, but definitely a chilly, winter-like feel during what is still technically the fall season. So, it appears this colder air mass will settle in for a while, but I do anticipate a pattern change is on the horizon. As we move toward the 30th, we're still dealing with slightly below average temperatures, as indicated by these blue shadings. These are colder than normal temperature anomalies. However, notice this pocket of green appearing over the middle of the country. We've been monitoring this as well. The potential for an Arctic outbreak is there, though the probability has decreased since yesterday. Still, this represents very cold temperatures, 15 to 20 degrees below average, plunging into the nation's midsection. It's a notable signal for a significant cold air intrusion into the central United States. However, I do expect a warming trend as we head into early December for the southeast as a ridge of high pressure begins to build, though that pattern is subject to change. Now, don't get discouraged if you're a fan of the cold. Various models have been pointing to this for some time, but the data does show a substantial drop of cold air into the middle of the country as we start looking ahead to the 2nd and 3rd of the month. We will delve deeper into the December forecast later in this segment. For now, let's examine an operational run from the European AI model. It projects a rather potent cold front moving in, which would be arriving on the evening of the 30th. I realize that's still quite a ways out, but that is an impressively tight gradient for a cold front slated for that Sunday evening, the 30th. That's certainly some remarkable atmospheric dynamics. Consider this: sub-freezing temperatures in the Texas Panhandle while we have readings in the 80s down near Brownsville, which, as you know, is a scenario that tends to unfold in Texas a couple of times each year. It's not entirely out of the ordinary, but it's always a considerable shock to the system, isn't it? So, this is a significant Arctic front, and I believe there's a legitimate possibility of this scenario unfolding based on our current observations, particularly with the significant high-latitude blocking over the Arctic region that can dislodge a substantial mass of cold air. And importantly, this is all corroborated by the 8 to 14-day temperature outlook. If you've been following my forecasts, and likely those of others, we've been focused on trying to pinpoint the timing of that first cold front, and now our task is to resolve the timing of the second one. I'm fairly confident that the arrival of that first front late next week is becoming locked in. But take a look at this. Experts at the Climate Prediction Center confirm what we've been discussing, that a pattern change was on the way, and well, here it is. This outlook covers the period between the November 27th timeframe and the 3rd of December. So this actually extends into the period where we expect the ridge to begin building into the eastern US, which creates, a bit of a balancing act in the forecast. However, if you reside in this blue-shaded area, that indicates a leaning toward below-average temperatures. There is a definite probability for it. The deeper the blue shading, the higher the probability of experiencing those below-average temperatures, covering a large portion of the nation. I'm not anxious in a worried sense. Rather, I'm quite eager in an excited way to really see what the new 3 to 4 week outlook reveals tomorrow, which is a topic we're about to dive into. So, with any storm system developing in that time frame, as that Arctic air plunges into the middle of the country, well, the European AI model will only display green for precipitation, but it's important to understand that some of this will be snow, particularly as this Arctic boundary continues to press southward. I suspect we could be looking at a significant storm system developing right here, and the situation could become quite dynamic. Indeed, I think widespread rain could overspread the eastern US ahead of this boundary. However, we still need to resolve the finer details of this setup, and the standard European model is now showing something similar as well. As we approach the final days of November, it depicts a plume of moisture riding along an Arctic boundary right into this region. This could translate to some very cold, perhaps powdery, snow. However, it certainly isn't nearly as aggressive with this scenario as the European AI model is. So, a signal is emerging once again. We'll examine the 3-day period for snowfall, that's a 72-hour window, and you'll notice the signal for this event fade out, only to reappear later. So, as we advance the forecast through time, you'll see an area of snow blossom across the northern plains. Now, that's not unusual for this time of year. I get it, it is winter after all, but there is a persistent signal for a notable event as we transition from the last few days of November into the first couple of days of December across the northern plains. And this is a feature we will be monitoring very closely as we get nearer to that time frame. So, as we look ahead into December, there's a great deal of model chatter about this period, and we're seeing considerable run-to-run inconsistency in the extended weekly forecasts. And I mean, that's to be expected this far out, but our starting point is where the standard European ensemble leaves off, at 360 hours into the forecast. And as we move forward, right, this is for December 3rd, and it's indicating a significant plunge of cold air right across the nation's midsection. Now, this aligns perfectly with what we were just discussing. It makes perfect sense when you see this large trough, which is this blue area representing a trough of low pressure. This pattern ushers in cold air and can also trigger one or more storm systems. Notice the significant ridge building way up into Alaska in this area. That's going to dislodge Arctic air, sending it south into this trough while another ridge builds across the southeast. This will signal a return to warmer than average temperatures following next week's initial cold front. However, this setup is likely to funnel a substantial amount of cold air down from the polar region, a pattern we refer to as a cross-polar flow. When you see this extensive blue shading stretching from the high latitude southward, that signifies a direct connection to the true Arctic region. So, what happens as we advance past this time frame? Does this ridge get broken down? Now we're looking several days into December. This is for the 6th, for example. You can see the trough beginning to orient itself more toward the eastern U.S. So, does this indicate that a significant push of cold air is heading further east? I believe there's a strong possibility of that, which could also increase our chances for winter storms as we get several days in. Roughly a week, give or take a day, into December for the eastern U.S. This is a time frame I'm definitely keeping an eye on. Well, actually, that's an area, not a time frame, Mitch, but you understand what I'm getting at. Once we get about a week into December, we'll need to be watching closely. The potential concern as we approach mid-December is this. This particular pattern becomes concerning because the forecast could quickly flip back to a warmer setup. The model wants to re-establish a flattened ridge over the southern tier of the nation, which would anchor the coldest air to the north. However, this could be a very favorable pattern for snow in the northern states. But as we get closer to Christmas, the trough's orientation becomes more favorable. It suppresses this ridge, and we see a more classic positive PNA and negative EPO with blocking over Alaska. This results in high pressure over Alaska and additional ridging across the western U.S. Then, cold air can funnel southward behind that trough, potentially spawning areas of low pressure. So, we'll definitely have to continue monitoring this, folks. I think the details are still being worked out, as we're seeing a lot of model inconsistency. But ultimately, I'm moving past the discussion on the polar vortex and the sudden stratospheric warming for now. My primary focus right now is on the MJO, folks. I truly mean that. And if we take a look here first, I want to examine this quickly since we do have a little bit of time. I feel like I'm moving through this forecast pretty efficiently, so long as we don't get any technical interruptions. But anyway, I want to look at the operational Euro model's projection for the MJO progression once more. For any new viewers, let's break this down. We're looking at phases 7, 6, 5, 4, and even phase 3. Phase 3 can work for cold, as can phase 7. So, both ends of this range in the MJO can be favorable. However, the phases in between are primarily warm phases, meaning warmer patterns will likely dominate over cold across most of the lower 48. Again, phase 3 and phase 7 are our cold phases, and it looks like phase 7 is about to become influential for parts of the country, which is what this is showing, is dominated by warmth. So, you might be asking, which winter weather phases are favorable for bringing in that cold air? Well, phase 8 is king, particularly in December. Phases 1 and 2 are also excellent. So, let's look at where we are now and where we're headed. Today is the 20th, so we're currently situated right in this jumbled area. Do you see this 8 and 10 cluster? Okay, that corresponds to early November, which is now behind us, right? About 10 days or a week or two ago. So it's a bit difficult to discern, but we're positioned roughly in this zone. We're approaching what some call the COOD, the circle of death range. But the real question is, where are we going next? So this forecast covers the 23rd through the 25th of November, and then we move toward the 27th, which is also still in November. This indicates a progression, with the pattern really amplifying as we head into Phase 7, which will allow cold air to spill into the country. However, its push southward will be fleeting, and it will be primarily anchored in the northern sections of the country and the central U.S. This aligns perfectly with what we're observing, as a significant amount of cold Arctic air plunges into the nation. Regarding phases 6, 5, and 4, listen, they can deliver cold air, but it tends to be very transient. It won't be anchored in place and lacks any real longevity. That brings us to phases 8 and 1. So, if you look closely, you can see this progression into phases 1 and 3 right here. That corresponds to December 1st through December 3rd. So, the forecast shows us moving right through Phase 7 and heading toward the coveted glory phase, Phase 8. That is the pattern we need. And if we examine the extended Euro model here, it projects our eventual entry into Phase 8 around the middle of the month. So, what's the evidence supporting this? Let's take a quick look at the MJO phase and temperature climatology. Right? So this chart covers November, December, and January, making it the perfect data set for our analysis. Let me enlarge this for you. As you can see, and just as I mentioned, Phase 3 is predominantly warm with cooler conditions across the west. Phase 4 brings warmth to the entire country. Phase 5 is much the same as is Phase 6. Then we have Phase 7. Okay, here we start to introduce some colder air, though it appears the southeast will hang on to near average or above average temperatures. However, if you analyze Phase 7 and then review everything we just discussed about the upcoming pattern, you'll see it provides perfect support for this forecast. Cold air will struggle to penetrate deep into the south. It's expected to remain firmly anchored across the northern tier of the country, and based on everything we've just covered for the period between now and December, that's precisely the scenario that's taking shape. Following that, we transition into Phase 8. Do you see that phase depicted down there? Notice all that blue blanketing the lower 48? For all you cold and winter weather enthusiasts, that's the pattern we're waiting for. Okay? And if we also consider the precipitation outlook, I hadn't originally planned to show this as the signal is a bit splotchy and widespread, but it does indicate increased precipitation across the deep south. So that is certainly something to keep an eye on. We can discuss the disruption of the polar vortex endlessly, right? I've been speaking on sudden stratospheric warming, and I believe it can interact with the proper MJO phase to really create a high-impact event, establishing a high ceiling for what's possible in December. But ultimately, if we fail to progress in Phase 8, all that cold air is expected to remain locked into the northern tier of the lower 48. This is great news for winter weather enthusiasts in the Northeast, potentially the Mid-Atlantic, and across the northern tier of the country. For our winter weather fans tuning in from the south, we really need to shift into Phase 8, otherwise we'll be struggling to fight off that persistent ridge. Alright, with that long-range outlook covered, let's focus on today's weather patterns. We're seeing a significant surge of moisture across the southern tier of the country, and it is certainly much needed. It's arriving all at once, but we will absolutely take it. Pardon me, my nose is running as I get worked up over this active pattern. We also have abundant moisture streaming into the west, with some additional moisture noted across the Great Lakes region as well. But yes, it's definitely a much more active weather morning for the south-central U.S. compared to what we've seen recently. Due to this active pattern, flood watches have been issued for parts of Texas. We also have some winter weather advisories in effect, along with widespread fog across the southern tier, fueled by a significant amount of warm air. Given that we're in Phase 6, this warm air is to be expected. Now, turning to the Storm Prediction Center's outlook, a marginal risk for severe weather is in place for portions of Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and New Mexico, marking another day with this threat, just like yesterday. So, please stay weather aware. A significant risk of flash flooding accompanies this system, particularly down here. I urge caution near Kerrville, Campwood, Rock Springs, Junction, and Brackettville. Excuse me, trying not to sneeze here. There's a 40% probability of excessive rainfall in that specific zone, with a 15% chance in the surrounding yellow shaded area, so be mindful of that flash flood potential. The same threat extends across Arkansas, southern Missouri, parts of Oklahoma and Kansas, and even into western Tennessee. A risk of flash flooding is present there as well. Moving to the southeast, we have quiet conditions today, though we certainly need the rain. However, some showers could push into Tennessee and Kentucky this afternoon, and we can definitely use it. That moisture will eventually work its way into eastern Tennessee. We could see some light shower activity reaching the Tri-Cities region later on tonight, as well as into western and southwestern Virginia. Still, most of the southeast remains quiet, though we're hoping to wake up to some rain across the Piedmont of North Carolina and southern Virginia. Now, for the Northeast, a quiet day of weather is in store. There's not much to report for today, but as we wake up tomorrow morning, we could see some festive flurries in those classic spots across northern Vermont, New Hampshire, and the Adirondacks. Shifting to the south-central U.S., we are tracking a lot of rain. Continuous waves of rain are being fueled by strong divergence aloft in this area, supporting a very moist environment with plenty of rising air. And we are certainly going to see the results of that across Oklahoma and Texas with multiple rounds of thunderstorms. This will be around 3 or 4 o'clock this afternoon. As you can see, nearly the entire state of Oklahoma will be dealing with rainfall with a line of thunderstorms sweeping through central Texas. This activity will persist into the evening hours. Mary, be on the lookout later tonight, as a line of thunderstorms could impact you there in Northeast Texas. She's one of our loyal followers here on the channel. But indeed, we have continuous, active feeds of moisture funneling into this region, up in the north-central U.S. Plenty of warm air means no snow. In fact, we could even see some rain showers developing later this evening across the U.P. Yes, some rain, and we'll see if we can get it to spread farther, pushing into southern Illinois, Oklahoma, Missouri, and southern Nebraska by later tomorrow morning. In the western USS, moisture continues to funnel into the southwest. Later this evening, we are tracking a great deal of moisture across California, which will bring higher elevation snow, but there is still not a lot of cold air to work with, folks. Regarding temperatures, and speaking of that cold and warm air, the Northeast remains locked into winter, while the southern tier of the country stays warm. And there's a distinct temperature gradient across the West. This is the pattern we're observing as it gradually cools down, but for the most part, it's not yet cold enough for any significant snow in the lower elevations. Let's use this as our timestamp. This news will make some people in the Northeast happy, while it may upset those who are not fans of winter weather. However, we're going to share a quick Bible devotion, and then we will wrap this up. I'm also going to say a few words about something that occurred yesterday, but first, from Psalm chapter 119, verse 50. And I'm actually going to read verses 49 and 50. Remember your word to your servant, for you have given me hope through it. This is my comfort in my affliction. Your promise has given me life. So the message is that we should find hope in the promise of God and comfort in His word during adversity. God's word is a powerful source of strength during difficult times. The promises of God found in the word should give us the strength to be resilient through tough times. And I believe God won't put you through anything that He won't see you out of. It might seem like you can't get out of it, folks, but He is going to get you out of it. Sometimes He lets you sit in that valley, as I'll mention, and sometimes you're called to go through that valley, and sometimes you aren't. But through His guidance, His greater purpose in it all will be realized if you trust Him. And sometimes, friends, that greater purpose is simply growth. I say this often. The growth is in the grind. That is why during suffering we should find comfort, because we know God has our back. And I'm just going to leave it at that. So, it just goes back to, and listen, I'm speaking to myself here as well. As always, I am speaking to myself here. And it's so important to really talk to God when you're going through tough times. And that quiet time is tremendously important. I can tell you one of my favorite times to talk to God is during my 8-minute drive from my house to Planet Fitness, from about 4 to 10 to 4:20 in the morning. I mean, it just feels like the world is quiet and my mind is completely free in the best way possible. So I can just talk to God. I feel like He's right there in the passenger seat beside me. But on another note, folks, I want to mention this really quickly. If you didn't see it, please check out the community post from yesterday evening. The AI situation is getting out of hand, everyone. There's a channel out there that's not only taking my content, but is also taking Gerald's, from the GM Weather channel, which is a great YouTube channel that's becoming very well known in the weather community. And I suspect he's doing it to others, too. But I haven't taken the time to look and compare all of that. But basically, what this person is doing is taking everything like all the information I just covered. They will probably do it with this video, too. And they are using an AI voiceover of the exact words I am saying with only a few minor edits. We're tracking an area of digital turbulence, where an individual appears to be generating derivative content through an artificial intelligence system with slight modifications. The situation is proving to be quite volatile. We have confirmed one significant impact on my own broadcast, though the full scope of this system has yet to be determined. This particular event registered a viewership surge of approximately 3 times that of the original broadcast, a clear indicator of the unpredictable atmospheric pressures within the current algorithmic climate. This is a weather pattern we have discussed in previous outlooks. Therefore, we are issuing a community advisory, if your schedule permits, as we understand navigating these things can be demanding at times. We ask you to proceed to the coordinates of this disturbance. The location is posted in our community bulletin, and I will likely provide a direct link in the section below. Upon arrival, please file a report on the channel for impersonation. The reporting system will ask you to identify the channel being impersonated. To do so, please navigate to my primary YouTube homepage, copy the direct URL, and paste that link into the required field. This verification is critical, as the activity is directly targeting this station. This same protocol can be utilized for other affected outlets, such as Gerald's, but it is imperative that we mount a coordinated response. The long-range forecast indicates a protracted struggle. We anticipate dealing with this climate for the foreseeable future. While artificial intelligence can certainly bring fair weather in some applications, it is also capable of producing these severe storm cells. On a personal note, my own disposition remains steady, as I am anchored by a faith that will see me through this turbulence. We are a community here, weathering this front together. That concludes this special bulletin. I have to sign off for now, but I wish you all clear skies and a wonderful day. We will reconvene for the morning briefing tomorrow. And until then, God bless.